What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly review show where I go over the books that I picked up this week, give you my impression on them, and whether there's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. To start off with, we're going to go with Death of X number 4. So this is the conclusion of the big crossover event. Well, it's not a crossover event yet, but it's leading into Inhumans vs. X-Men, IVX. So this is the story of the death of Cyclops, the last real X-Man, I guess, according to how they're naming this thing. And to be honest with you, there's just nothing about this book that wasn't really disappointing overall. The end was very predictable. As for people that are saying that it's kind of a twist or something like that, there were some very clear indications early on, both in the story as well as in the writing, that this is how things were going to go. It was just really telegraphed, at least to my sensibilities, and it doesn't really give me anything. I mean, it makes Cyclops feel kind of like a chump, and then Emma feels like way worse than she probably is. It's just, man, there's just so much that's just not satisfying about this, unfortunately. But this is the conclusion that we get of Death of X before we start up IVX, which is going to be coming in the near future. Overall, not something I can recommend, but I'll do a video for you guys so that way I can give you the entire lowdown on everything, what's going on. Then we hop into a book that I didn't see the ending of because I haven't really been reading it, but that's Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur number 13. So Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur I've heard some very good things about, especially when it originally came out, but it just isn't something that really struck my fancy. But hopping into this one, I can see how Lunella is a very compelling character. Overall, she is a bit overconfident, for her age, being a 4th grader, knowing that she is the smartest person in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. There's a really cool scene in here which shows Lunella as a little bit more grown-up version of herself, which actually alludes to her perception of who these people are and where they came from. I don't necessarily think this is an accurate representation of what people would look like in her future grown-up, but what she strives to be. She strives, at least in her innermost self, to be that person that everyone's coming to for help, so that way she feels justified in her intelligence. And, Amadeus Cho, she's a kid, so he's still treating her with kid gloves, even though he's barely past a kid himself, and she really resents that. So this is a combination of her age as well as her intelligence kind of playing at odds with each other, which I really kind of appreciate. It's definitely a cool book, and if you've had any kind of remote interest in picking it up, definitely hop on. I found it very acceptable. I found it very warm and welcoming when it comes to Lunella's story. But next we have a book that I didn't really expect much from because I didn't really enjoy the first one too much, and that's Prowler number 2, and we see a bit more of the same. It's just, I wasn't really expecting a whole heck of a lot because there wasn't a lot of substance that was really offered in Prowler number 1, and as a clone conspiracy tie-in, it's still very kind of tangential. It's surrounding the perimeter of the entire event. Hobie Brown got knocked out, so he's been taken prisoner. I think this Julia Carpenter lady from Daredevil, she's in there, and then she escapes, and then ultimately Electro's a psycho, and Madam Web gets tortured, and there's not a lot for me to go on for this book. It just doesn't feel like it's giving me anything in the way of story, and I find that that's really unfortunate. There's got to be more to this, and I feel like the disservice that this book is getting is because it's being launched as part of a tie-in to this overall clone conspiracy event. I was really, if this book was given a fair shot, maybe like started off next spring as a complete standalone, and you gave Hobie Brown his own adventures after the outcome of clone conspiracy, that'd be a different story. But right now, I just don't see any reason to pick it up at all, unfortunately. But a book that I've been reading all along that I loved this entire issue, and that is Empress number 7. So Empress number 7 shows Emporia, the Empress of the galaxy or whatever, this whole quadrant. Finally, she throws down with Morax, her ex-estranged husband, because she's on the lam with her kids. And I mean, it was just one of those situations where, like, Morax is lots of bad words. I just don't like that dude at all. I thought he was going to start smacking his kids, and I was just done with him. And then Emporia just blows him out of the water, and that was so cool, because I was just waiting for her kind of like boyfriend to throw down and really kind of beat his ass. But nope, she just handles her own, and I love the fact that the kids are accepting. And this is a great wrap up to the first book, the first volume of Empress. So I can't wait to see where this story goes, because Mark Millar, as he does, left it kind of as a cliffhanger for us to want a little bit more out of volume 2. So definitely Empress is a good book. I'd wait for the trade, read it all at once, and that's going to be a much more compelling story for you guys. Then we get to a book that's been teetering on the edge of my pull list, and that's SpiderGwen number 14. So SpiderGwen number 14 is Thanksgiving themed, as you can probably see here, just judging by the turkey in front of Matt Murdock, who in Earth 65 is the Kingpin. He's made a deal with Spider-Woman, aka Gwen Stacy, to kind of like support Captain Stacy or former police Captain Stacy, whatever. And what I find in this book is that there's not really a whole lot of progression that happens for Gwen Stacy's character. There's not a whole lot of exploration. It's really just kind of Gwen feeling bad about how things are going, getting herself into a little bit more hot water, you know. It's meant to be like a warm, feel-good kind of family story, but I get the feeling that she is just really terrible at hiding her secret identity because it seems like everyone knows who Spider-Woman is. So this isn't quite the book that I was looking for in order to kind of save this for me. I was really enjoying the first few arcs of Spider-Gwen, but this one is just not enough to kind of keep me there, man, unfortunately. And another book that's working really hard but not really doing his job to keep me is Kingsway West number 3. So Kingsway West, I believe, is going to end after the next issue. And to be honest with you, it feels like Greg Pak is just kind of rushing and cramming everything that he possibly can into this issue to try and save it and, you know, bring it back for a couple more issues after that, because it leaves off where issue 2 was, and there's still not enough world building. There's still not enough character development. You just get the idea that this Chinese guy is going to start killing a whole heck of a lot of people, and then there's the introduction of their source of red gold, which, I mean, if we'd have taken this a bit slower and given it a little bit more depth instead of just kind of skimming along the shallow end of the pool, I think that this could have been a really good book, but unfortunately I just don't feel like the time is there for it to be developed before it comes to an untimely demise. Unfortunately, it's just not hitting on all cylinders right now. But then there is a book that is hitting on all cylinders, and that would be Sorcerer Supreme. So while this doesn't quite compel me the same way that the main book by Jason Aaron, you know, the main Doctor Strange book does, this is still a really good introduction into various other Sorcerer Supreme. And I can see this as being a really good place to develop those characters, you know, like Sir Isaac Newton is a very interesting character. This whole Demon Rider character that hopefully is going to be getting a much larger arc in issue number 3, that seems to be a really compelling character, and there's a lot of other ones that you can develop in here. So this is a book that is ripe for some offshoots. If we can do some individual character studies that kind of overlap with the individual stories, I would really love to see that. You know, Wiccan's story was kind of okay, but I'd really love to see just a bit more depth, a little bit more fleshed out into it. I can't say that this is a disappointing book, but it's not necessarily one that I would consider on par with Doctor Strange. It's definitely a book that you might want to check out if you're into the magical aspect of things, but it's not my main genre inside comic books, so it's not necessarily at the tops of my pull list, but it's something that I'll stick around with for a little bit. It's definitely got enough to keep me interested, at least for another issue. But then there's a book that was kind of losing me fast until the last page of this one, and that is Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 9. So Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps really shows the story of John Stewart and the rest of the Corps, as well as Saronic, this daughter of Sinestro, how the Yellow Corps and the Green Corps are now trapped in this bottle of glass by Brainiac, who's evidently working for somebody else. And we see the return of Ganthet, you know, the Guardian, and we see a very familiar face in here by the name of Abin Sur. So he Hal Jordan gets to see the person that wasn't necessarily able to be his mentor, but the person that passed the ring on to him. I don't want to tell you that Kyle Rayner's back, but I just did. So yeah, no, it's cool. I can't wait to see what Hal Jordan and Kyle Rayner can do to kind of save the Green Lantern Corps. And like I've said before, this book is its best when it's focusing on Hal. So I mean, I can totally see Hal and Kyle sharing the spotlight for a little while, but it definitely needs to focus a bit more on Hal. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Civil War II number 7. So Civil War II number 7, based on everything that's been coming out over the last 2 months, should have been the final confrontation that has resulted in the consequences that have been pushed upon Tony Stark. You know, whether he's disappeared, or he's been banished, he's been killed. This is what should have happened. And what do we get? We get Ulysses flashing forward to the world of Old Man Logan and almost being killed by a Hulk. And I wish it would have happened. I honest to God wish it would have happened, because Civil War II just continues to prove how inconsequential and how irrelevant it really is, or it feels. I mean, I'm spitting a lot of venom at this thing right now just because I found that this was completely lacking in every respect for me, unfortunately. And it didn't even give me the payoff that I was looking for. It was a completely irrational way for Tony Stark to go about things. Carol, completely irrational. I mean, Spider-Man and Captain America, they should have just chilled on the Capitol steps and started eating popcorn or something like that. Have some cotton candy and just let it live. Just let it be. There was absolutely no need for the escalation at the end of the book, and I find it completely artificial, which is extremely frustrating if you can't tell. So I'm going to go into more detail on my actual Civil War 2 issue number 7 review, which I'm going to be doing after this, but yeah, man, frustrated as all hell about this book. So, yeah, definitely don't need to pick it up at all, unless you really, really need to see almost nothing happen. But then a conclusion that actually does give us a little bit of closure is Batgirl number 5. So Batgirl number 5 actually, it's not so much about the battle with the teacher, but it's the battle inside of Barbara Gordon's own brain, because her eidetic memory, her ability to kind of recount anything at any point in time, is actually one of her limiting factors. And that's a really interesting perspective from Hope Larson. I like the idea that at some point in time, Barbara has to realize that everything that she's using, it's like she's a computer, and she's got so much RAM. And if you use up all that RAM for kind of continually accessing memory, you're not going to be able to maximize the potential of the processing. So what she does, she clears out her cache for her RAM and just goes straight CPU with everything that she possibly can from the RAM to help it out. And she just goes super genius, which is really cool. But evidently she imbued herself with a little bit of memory to kind of turn that back on, and it's going to be interesting to see how she explores that dynamic moving forward, if it's something that's going to be recurring or not. But I found this to be way more promising, and I like the fact that she's headed back to Burnside in order to continue being Batgirl instead of international Batgirl. I'm gonna stick with this one because I really like Raphael Albuquerque's art, and this helped me turn a corner on a book that I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to keep reading. But then there's a book that I'm going to have to keep reading, and that's Action Comics 968. So Action Comics is going to continue the Godslayer or the Men of Steel arc, which is going to be revolving heavily around Lex Luthor. And this is going to kind of give you an insinuation, or at least infer that this is what happens when you give Lex Luthor a mother box. He is going to destroy worlds, murder millions, and just become this ultimate despot dictator of the galaxies. And I really think that that's a good ending for Lex Luthor. I think that would be super entertaining, like the Luthor Wars instead of the Darkseid Wars. That would be pretty rad, but it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of dichotomy of Superman, he knows that Lex Luthor has this ultimate potential to be a villain, and then you've got Clark Kent actually playing a little bit of devil's advocate at the end of this thing, which is going to just make things that much tougher. It really gives you a perspective as to where is Clark Kent coming from? And this is where if he was raised by Ma and Pa Kent, and he had the same kind of experience as a child that Clark did, that Superman did, how can he come with that perspective? And then that's going to probably explore a little bit more of Superman. So I'm really excited to see where this one goes. Definitely a recommended pickup. It's not quite as strong as Superman. Superman's been my favorite book out of DC Rebirth so far. But as far as Superman stories go, it's still way better than what I ever really thought about Superman. And I was never really a big fan. So it's fun that I've got 2 Superman books to work with and that are doing different things at the same time. But to follow up Superman, we have The Flash in issue number 11. So continuing with the Speed of Darkness, we actually see that Shade isn't necessarily the villain. Shade has actually kind of been reformed at this point in time in previous DC continuity, and he's trying to get help. So he dragged Kid Flash in, and eventually he dragged Flash in, and now we know that his former love is there in the Shadowlands with them, as well as Iris, who got dragged into things, and it's going to be interesting to see how this goes, because the shadows and the infectious nature of them they might have turned the bad girls a little bit more bad. So it's going to be interesting to see where that's at. I like the way that this story is going. It's still not quite as fun and powerful as where the Godspeed arc was, which was really a good starting point for this. But I'm interested to see where this kind of concludes and how this kind of impacts the relationship between Wally, Iris, and Barry, because that's ultimately the story it's telling. It's going to be impacting those 3 characters on a very fundamental level. At least that's the way that I feel like it's going to go. But a book that I can't help but enjoy is Deathstroke. And Deathstroke number 7 is interesting because this is seeing Deathstroke face off with the Man of Steel, whether he knows it or not. And we know that Joseph, his son, is manipulating things from behind the scenes, but it turns out that it's with the help of his mother, Abigail. So these 2 are running some sort of cult. So I'm not necessarily 100% familiar with this, but we did see Joseph's absolute destruction of Dr. Icon previously. Now he's got his suit, he's flying, he's got these powers, he's out there saving the day as kind of a hero figure. And then Abigail, at the behest of the CIA or whatever industry she's in front of, it goes to Superman and it's just like, how can you let this man run rampant? It's just like, well, soldiers are killers. And she's like, blah, blah. She lays this whole thing on him and basically guilt trips Superman into taking on Deathstroke. So this is the conclusion, but it's only part 1. So essentially this could have been like a 64-page book, but they're splitting it up between issues 7 and issues 8, which I'm totally fine with, because it gives me a little bit more anticipation, because the last page is, man, the Man of Steel comes in and he is ready to throw down with Deathstroke. And how does Deathstroke combat someone like that? Then we also have books like Teen Titans #2. So Teen Titans #2 gives us a little bit more of a backstory regarding the whole confrontation that Damian Wayne is going to have with this whole kind of demon's fist. So we actually see Talia come and try to, persuade Damian to come back by her side, and then ultimately that's where he gets the information that's necessary to bring the Teen Titans together. Once this information is revealed to the Teen Titans, it makes things a lot more complicated because they don't necessarily understand who Damian is. They don't know him, they haven't fought with him, they haven't been friends with him, they were abducted by this kid like probably hours ago, and it was just this scene, this whole sense. He tried to give Damian a really strong character moment where it's just like, I could have been, the son of the demon or the grandson of the demon, but I'm the son of Batman. You know what? I get what you're trying to do, Ben Percy. It's keeping me going, but I mean, there's got to be a bit more strength in this, and I find that the strength is probably going to come from the Mara character and the whole relationship that she's had with Damian and how that's really going to work. I'm really interested to see where that goes. That's going to be something pretty interesting. But a book that's definitely interesting is Titans #5. So while I usually use this book as kind of like a DC Rebirth reference, because that's where most of the Easter eggs have been popping up, this one, I don't really care, because this is probably one of the coolest Wally West stories I've read in a long time. Well, there haven't been many Wally West stories for a while, but it's really interesting because this is nothing short of just being an entire internal monologue. This is Wally West talking to himself, and he has to cover like 7,000 miles in 6.5 seconds. And how fast is the fastest man alive? How fast does he have to be? Faster than sound? Faster than light? Faster than the speed of magic? Faster than he's ever been before? So in true Flash fashion, he runs a little faster than he ever has before, and that results in a complete dissolution of Wally West at the end of the book. And that means that there's nothing really left to go on in this particular story, but his kind of blast into infinity with this blue force, speed force lightning is a very cool kind of conclusion, because it almost mirrors when we see the supposed exile of characters by Dr. Manhattan and being pulled out of that universe. But this is definitely a speed force infused kind of color, so you've got to wonder if there's some kind of symmetry that goes along with that. If there's a symbolism that's also in his speed lightning and the whole Dr. Manhattan incident. So I'm really interested to see where this kind of goes as, Wally West bounces around infinity. This is a really cool book. Titans is very fun. But then we have another book that's really enjoyable and fun, and that is Mighty Thor #13. So in Mighty Thor, we actually see the formation of the League of Realms. So this was actually from Thor, God of Thunder, like way back in the day in Jason Aaron's run. They formed to protect the realms, but this time they're basically under the threat of exile if they do anything like this. And that doesn't really matter, because they're going to storm Alfheim, they're going to take down Malekith, and there's a pretty great team of people that are going about this. But in the end, there's not really a whole heck of a lot that they can do. They make it past all these various defenses, there's all these other things going on, and then ultimately Malekith shows up with Loki, the queen, and then this new person, Curse. So I'm really interested to see what this whole thing ends up being, because there's only one more issue. This is only a two-parter, man. Like, this whole siege of Alfheim in the beginning of the seeding of the War of the Realms, this is going to be over next issue, because in issue #15, we're going to see something along the lines of a kind of a galactic war. And that's going to be really cool, but I'm not going to spoil too much about this. Mighty Thor is definitely a really fun read. If you're not reading it, I definitely recommend picking it up. There's a lot of really cool Easter eggs, especially when it's tying into the Thor and Unworthy Thor mythos, which is kind of running parallel to this. But if you're talking about game changers, the big game changer this week is Wonder Woman #11, because Wonder Woman #11 is the conclusion of the Lies story arc. And the Lies is basically set up in DC Rebirth, in Wonder Woman Rebirth, where we see this kind of shattered imagination, like her whole perceived memories, all of her origin stories are overlapping and just blown to pieces, and she understands that she is no longer in a truthful world. And this is a earth-shattering kind of revelation that Greg Rucka is just basically going to say, you know what? I'm going to do what I want. And this is like super mic drop boss moment as to what's going to be moving forward with the Wonder Woman storyline. I'm really interested to see where this goes. I'm going to be doing a review on Wonder Woman, so I'm going to go into that in a lot more detail, and I don't want to spoil too much for you guys if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. Highly recommend that you go pick it up, and if you haven't been reading at least the odd issues, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and now 11, definitely go grab those too, so that way you can make sure that you're caught up. And another book you should catch up on is Detective Comics. So Detective Comics 945 is the continuation of the Victim Syndicate. And what we see in the Victim Syndicate is basically they're doubting themselves really, really hard. Like Batman's doubting himself. He's just like, you know what, Alfred? I've tried to remember everybody. And, was it the first victim? When I was battling the Red Hood, and he's throwing back, like, deep in continuity. And Alfred's like, that's the second one, Master Bruce. There was one before that, one earlier. And Batman realizes that he can't remember. He tries to remember every single potential victim of his actions, and he can't. He can't remember them at all. And what we see is that there's another person that really can't remember their victims, and that is Clayface. But I find that the parallel between the way that Clayface is and the way that Batman is very interesting. And then you've got Cassandra. And she's out there just yelling at Batman like, this is all your fault. Everything is your fault. Everything is about you. Everything is about making you feel good. It's not about making other people feel good. And it's about all the pain that's caused to everybody else. And it's just like, you know what? Maybe she's right. Yeah, no, that's definitely a possibility. Batman definitely caused a lot of pain. And I was just really kind of taken aback by that whole aspect because I didn't expect to kind of feel that way. But there's a whole lot of justification, and that just shows how well James Tynion IV is writing this book. Definitely one of the strongest DC Rebirth books, and I can't recommend picking it up enough. And then a really strong independent title is going to be Black Monday Murders. And Black Monday Murders basically sums up the whole thing as saying, when in doubt, eat your own kind. And for those of you that are reading the book, you're definitely going to know what I'm talking about. And for those of you that aren't reading the book, this is way too late for you to get in on it. I would recommend picking up issue 1, 2, 3, and 4. Jonathan Hickman writes a very well-crafted story. I don't think that he knows any other way to write a story. And if you can get past some of the kind of dryness of the overall subject matter, the monetary system and the occult and all that kind of stuff, it makes for a really intriguing tale, and you can appreciate the kind of details that go into the plot and the whole structure of things. Definitely very cool. Definitely for a specific kind of audience, but I can't help but love Black Monday Murders for what it is, which is amazing. But now that we're done with the ongoing titles, let's talk about new number ones. And the first one on my list is Ultimates Squared number 1. And Ultimates Squared number 1 is us revisiting the team of the Ultimates. So they've been disbanded as a result of Civil War II. Thanos has escaped. There's no longer any confidence in the relationship between the U.S. and Wakanda caused by the whole confrontation that Black Panther had in Civil War II. And this is just, why are they reforming? Why is there another book? Oh, it's because Galactus says so. He calls them from the various corners of the universe out to where he's at, so that way they can basically become deputy heralds. Because you got Connor Sims, who's already the Herald of Life, and he's brought them all in front of Galactus, so that way they can solve cosmic problems that are already ongoing. Eternity is chained up. There's an ominous presence outside there. There's so much work that needs to be done in order to make sure that the entire Marvel, universe doesn't get destroyed, isn't taken advantage of, isn't drained of all its life essence and energy. And this is awesome. If you have any mild interest in where the cosmic universe is going, if you like characters like Black Panther, if you like Carol Danvers, if you like America Chavez, Miss America, she's going to be the badass of this whole thing. And this is just a book that I can't recommend enough. It's going to be pretty low in circulation, so you're going to have to request it from your shops, but I really enjoy it. I'm probably going to be doing a review on it a little bit later, but definitely recommend you guys go grab this one. Even if you haven't read the previous series, go grab it, because it's still a good starting point. You might have to catch up on a few things, but definitely a good one to see how you feel about it. And then the other new number 1 from Marvel is Venom number 1. And I wasn't necessarily a huge buyer on Venom number 1, simply because Venom itself as an individual comic book hasn't really been the strongest. Venom Space Knight is a very different story, because that was kind of born out of the whole Guardians of the Galaxy and all this kind of stuff. And then you've got attempts like Venom Lethal Protector, which wasn't very good. And there's other stories out there where Venom as the main character doesn't necessarily work. But in this, we get the introduction of Lee Price. So remember that name, because he is the newest owner of the Venom symbiote. And I use the word owner specifically, because usually it's a partnership or some sort of parasitic relationship that goes on. This is none such case. Lee Price is in control, he's in the driver's seat, and it's interesting to see the evolution of the Venom symbiote compared to how he was originally versus how he is now. And I use the name it. The Venom symbiote itself has become a character trait, no more. It's like a full-on character on its own, and you get to see this kind of situation where it is bound to the will of its owner. And that's going to be very fun. I'm really excited to see where this one goes. This was a really good opening shot, and I can't wait to see where this kind of moves forward to. But to finish things off, we're going to talk about another new number one, and that is AD After Death. And it's not in a bag or a board or anything like that, because I don't have ones for magazines. This thing is gigantic. And Scott Snyder and Jeff Lemire do a great job with this, but it's not what I would call a comic book. This is definitely some sort of illustrated short story. The art direction is, Jeff Lemire's got a very unique art style, and I found that the watercolors and the kind of surrealist nature of the entire art scheme is very cool. And then the prose, the actual written words, are telling very different stories. And it's really, I don't know what to think about this. Because there's a lot of backstory that you feel might be important, but then it doesn't feel important immediately in the story. So it's really odd to see how it is. And it's not like it's poorly written. It's very well written. It's not like it's poorly illustrated, because the illustrations are very kind of, they give a very good feel to this overall world. It's just super different. And I've got mixed emotions. I don't necessarily know whether it's something that I enjoy or it's something that I don't enjoy. And I feel like I need to read it like 2 or 3 more times in order to get the full scope of things. And that's what a good book should make you feel. I wouldn't necessarily say a good comic book. Good comic books, you'll go back and you'll check out the art. You'll see if you've kind of hidden some Easter eggs in there, if there's something that you need to find, or if there's kind of renewed meaning. There's a few, like Watchmen will do that for you. V for Vendetta will do that for you. You go back and you find new meaning in those things. And the text is one of the things that I think is going to be driving that force. Because if I go back and I look at the story and then I look at the story in context after reading it again, that might give me a bit of a different perspective. But as it was unfolding, I was just like, oh, what's going on? This is a book that you're going to have to read for yourself and kind of get your own idea. But it's definitely something that I recommend that you take a look at. It might not be for everybody, and in fact, I know that it's not for everybody. It's definitely not something that you're going to get a real graphical pleasure out of. It's not going to be heavy on any kind of action, but you're wondering about the motivations of the characters. You're wondering about the motivations of this specific character. There's a lot of groundwork that's laid about the actual event that's caused this situation to happen, but there's not enough details, and it makes you want to kind of understand more. It makes you want to know more, and that's what a good book does. So I'm really excited to see where this one goes, but again, your mileage may vary, so take your time if you want to really get a good opinion of things. So those are all the books that I picked up this week, but I want to know what you guys grabbed too, so hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you thought about the books that you grabbed, and if there's something I should go back to the shop for. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.